Food has destroyed you. Look at what you've become. Either you go on a diet, or you are no longer my daughter. I heard those words on a Sunday afternoon at 1:45, with the winter light cutting through the bay window of the living room where I grew up, with the smell of pot roast still drifting from the kitchen, and with my brother Derek sitting on the couch pretending to scroll through his phone. My mother, Diane, was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room with a dish towel over her shoulder, looking me up and down the way someone looks at a budget line that doesn't balance. I went still. I felt the heat climb my neck, my cheeks, the back of my ears. I felt my stomach turn. And I felt, for the first time in 33 years of life, that the ground underneath me was completely solid. I looked at her, I breathed, and I said, with a calm that surprised me, "Then I'm not." I picked up my bag. I walked to the dining room table. I placed a white envelope on the burgundy tablecloth she used even on the most ordinary Sundays, and I walked out without looking back. 24 hours later, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. It was her. It was Derek. It was Aunt Patricia. It was a number I didn't recognize until later. It was all of them, at the same time, with an urgency that had nothing emotional about it. It smelled like desperation. When I finally opened the door the next day, she was standing there, smaller than I remembered, eyes red, hands clasped together, and the first thing she said was not, "I'm sorry." It was, "Lauren, we need to talk about the house." I looked at her for a long moment, and I said, "It's too late for that, but you don't know what was inside that envelope. Not yet. And to understand what was written on that paper, you need to understand everything that came before it, because that paper was the end of a story that started long before that Sunday. It started when I was 8 years old, and my mother called me chubby in front of my cousins for the first time, the way you'd comment on the weather, casual, matter-of-fact, like it required no further thought. If someone in your own family has ever made you feel like your body was a problem that needed to be fixed, tell me in the comments what's the worst thing they ever said to you. And subscribe to the channel because this story is for you. Every word of it. Let me tell you how we got here. Because to understand the turning point, you need to understand the wound. And that wound was 33 years deep. My name is Lauren. When all of this happened, I was 33 years old, living in Atlanta's Virginia Highland neighborhood, working as a senior project manager at a mid-sized healthcare consulting firm in Midtown. And I had a life that, from the outside, looked completely put together. I had friends. I went out. I was good at my job. My director said so. My clients confirmed it, and the projects that came in on time and under budget said it more clearly than any performance review ever could. I loved cooking on Sunday mornings, the slow kind where you taste as you go and put on a playlist and let the kitchen become a controlled mess. I loved crime documentaries, the ones that are so well researched they feel like graduate courses. I loved walking through the Ponce City Market on Saturday afternoons, browsing without any intention to buy, stopping for coffee somewhere with good light and better people watching. I had a tabby cat named Biscuit who slept on my feet every night and woke me up at 6:15 in the morning with a consistency that would embarrass any alarm clock. And I had a fat body. I always had, since childhood, since adolescence, since always. A body that the scale measured higher than average, that size 16 pants sometimes pulled at the waist, that made me want to position myself a little further back in group photos, a little to the side, a little less visible. But that body was mine. I lived in it. I worked in it. I laughed in it. Cried in it. Loved in it. It was not the problem in my life. The people who surrounded it were. My family lived in Decatur, in a 4-bedroom house that my father, Gerald, had bought in the early 90s when the neighborhood was still affordable and he had just made partner at his law firm. My father was a quiet man, the kind who prefers silence to conflict and who, for that very reason, had never managed to protect anyone from anything. He was always present and always absent at the same time, sitting at the head of the table, passing the bread basket, nodding along, never once saying enough. My mother, Diane, was the opposite. Diane had an opinion about everything and everyone, and she distributed those opinions with the generosity of someone who believes they're providing a service. She was a woman who had been thin her entire life, and treated that fact as a moral achievement, as if metabolism were a result of character rather than genetics. She was 59. Went to a Pilates studio 3 times a week, wore fitted clothes with the confidence of someone who knows she can, and looked at my body with a mixture of pity and bewilderment that she called concern. My brother Derek was 28, lean like my father, worked as a civil engineer, and was, in the family taxonomy, the child without problems. Not because he was perfect. Derek had his flaws. He was careless with money, chronically late, forgot important dates, but none of those flaws were visible in his body. And in my mother's logic, what doesn't show in the body doesn't exist. My older sister Nicole was 37 and had been living in Chicago for almost a decade. She had gone for a graduate program at Northwestern, stayed, married a man from Oak Park named James, and built a life entirely separate from ours. She called on birthdays, showed up for Christmas every other year, texted sporadically. I always assumed she had simply moved on, that the distance was geographic and not emotional. I was wrong about that. I just didn't find out until much later. The comments about my weight started before I had the vocabulary to name them. I was 8 when my mother told my cousins I was getting chunky. I was 11 when she stopped buying snacks for the house because, she said, it was for my own good. I was 14 when she started serving me smaller portions than Derek's without saying anything, as if I wouldn't notice. I was 17 when she took me to a nutritionist for the first time without asking me if I wanted to go. She just made the appointment and told me we had somewhere to be on Thursday. I learned very early that my body was a public topic inside my own home, that it was always on the agenda, always under evaluation, always in some process of correction. I learned that my mother's love came wrapped in conditions she never called conditions. She called them care. And the cruelest part was that she genuinely believed it. At the Sunday dinners that were non-negotiable in our family, the subject of my body came up with the same casualness as comments about traffic on I-285 or the price of gas. It wasn't deliberate cruelty. It was worse than deliberate cruelty. It was habit. It was the water I'd been swimming in my whole life, and it took me decades to recognize it as poison. There's a specific memory I carry to this day with a clarity that still unsettles me. I was 24. It was my grandmother's 80th birthday, a dinner at the Buckhead home of my Aunt Patricia, the whole family there, kids running around, a football game on in the background. I showed up in a wrap dress I had bought at Anthropology the week before and loved. A deep plum color, midi length with a subtle print. I had looked at myself in the mirror before leaving and thought, this works. I got to the party. My mother saw me walk in. She waited until I had greeted everyone, gotten a plate, found my seat. She waited until I was comfortable. Then she came over with a smile and said, low enough that only the people immediately around us could hear, Lauren, that dress isn't really doing you any favors, honey. You should stick to solid colors and longer hemlines. The dress was a solid color. The hemline was below the knee. I looked at her. She was already turning away, smiling at someone else, completely moving on, as if she had done me a courtesy. I spent the rest of that dinner trying to shrink into my chair. I ate less than I wanted. I left before dessert. I got home, took off the dress, folded it, put it in a bag for Goodwill. I never wore it again. That was the pattern. It wasn't an isolated incident. It was one comment a week, sometimes 2, sometimes more. It was the remark about what I was eating at Sunday dinner. It was the suggestion about a new weight loss program she'd read about. It was the comparison to a coworker's daughter who had lost 30 pounds and was looking so great. It was the magazine article about intermittent fasting she tore out and left in my coat pocket without saying anything. It was the way she looked at my plate before looking at my face when I walked through her door. And Derek. Derek who sat on the couch. Derek who never said anything directly cruel, but who also never once said a word in my defense, who laughed when the comment edged towards something that couldn't be laughed off, who shrugged when I tried to bring it up afterward, who said, that's just how she is, Lauren. She doesn't mean anything by it, as if intent erased impact. There were signs that something was wrong with me beyond what anyone could see, and I ignored every one of them for years. The scale I'd put in the back of the closet because I couldn't face it every morning. The clothes I avoided, not because I didn't like them, but because the effort of finding something that fit and didn't make me feel exposed was too much. The photos I asked friends not to post, or deleted when they appeared, or looked at with a dissociative distance, as if the body in the image wasn't quite mine. There was a period between 26 and 28 when I essentially disappeared from group photos, not dramatically. I was there at the events, the birthday dinners, the holiday gatherings, but I always positioned myself a little further back, a little to the side. Always arranged so I'd be easy to crop out if needed. When someone sent me a photo where I appeared, I'd look at it once and archive it without responding. Not because I thought I was ugly. It was something more complicated than that. It was as if I didn't want to leave a record, as if my physical presence in the world was something that needed to be minimized. My relationship with food during that time was something I didn't have words for. It wasn't binging every day. It was more cyclical than that. Days when I ate every bite with guilt, mentally tracking everything that went in, and nights when I stood at the open refrigerator at 11 p.m. and ate until there was a physical numbness that turned the noise in my head down. And then the guilt would come back doubled, and the cycle would start again. I didn't know that had a name. I thought it was a lack of willpower, the way I'd always been told. I thought the problem was me. There was one specific night, a Tuesday in February in Atlanta, when I sat on the bathroom floor after staring at the mirror too long and thought with a frightening clarity, I don't know how to be different from what I am. It wasn't suicidal. It was worse in a different way. It was the absence of any hope that things could change. It was the feeling of having arrived somewhere, and understanding that this was a permanent destination. I called my friend Maya that night. Maya had been my closest friend since we'd worked together at my first job out of college. The person who knew more about my family history than anyone else in my life. She picked up sounding half asleep, and she didn't say anything beautiful or wise. She said, "You're calling me at 1 in the morning, Lauren. I'm coming over." And she did. She drove 20 minutes across the city, showed up with a pint of ice cream, and sat with me on the bathroom floor eating ice cream until I was ready to sleep. She didn't ask what was going on. She just stayed. That was the ally I needed. Not someone with answers. Someone who stayed. The doctor's appointment I'd been putting off for 2 years because I knew what was coming. I knew I'd step on the scale, the doctor would look at the number, and everything I said after that would be filtered through that number. Any symptom I mentioned, the exhaustion that didn't lift with sleep, the irregular cycles, the difficulty losing weight even when I tried consistently, that constant sense that my body was working harder than it should for ordinary things, was going to be answered with the same response I'd been hearing since I was 17. You need to lose weight. I knew that's what I'd hear. So I didn't go. I postponed for 2 years a conversation that might have changed everything much sooner. The internal voice that followed me everywhere, the one that said I was lazy, that I lacked willpower, that if I just tried harder my body would be different, wasn't mine. It was my mother's voice, which I had internalized so completely that I could no longer tell the difference. I thought I was being honest with myself. I was actually reciting word for word the script I'd been handed since childhood. And then came that Sunday, that dinner, that sentence. But to get to that Sunday, I need to tell you what happened in the 3 months before it, because the Sunday wasn't an isolated incident. It was the end of an escalation. And the escalation started with a screenshot I was never supposed to see. It was a Thursday morning. I was at my desk in Midtown, and I got a text from Maya with a screenshot attached. Maya had gotten it from a coworker who was friends with a cousin of mine, a chain of unlikely connections that resulted in something that changed everything. The screenshot was from a family group chat, the family group chat I was part of, the one with aunts and cousins and grandparents. Except the screenshot wasn't from that group. It was from another one, a group I didn't know existed, a group without me. The message was from my mother, Diane, to Aunt Patricia, and it said, "Patricia, how much do you want to bet Lauren doesn't last 4 months on her own and comes crawling back here? I give her 2. She has no discipline for anything. I can't imagine her managing by herself." Aunt Patricia responded with a laughing emoji. Then, "Diane, you are terrible, but you're probably right." I read it 3 times, 4, 5, sitting at my desk in Midtown, the report open on my screen, my coffee going cold beside me. And I felt something break inside me with a crack so clean and final it was almost physical. It wasn't anger yet, it was clarity. For the first time I was seeing without any filter, without the excuse that that's just how she is, without the softening of it comes from a place of concern. It was what it was. My mother was betting her sister that I would fail, talking about me to the people who were supposed to be my family, and laughing about it. Maya was at my desk in 15 minutes. She pulled a chair over, sat beside me, looked at the screenshot, and was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Are you okay?" "No, but I will be." She put her hand on my arm and just stayed there for a moment, not saying anything. Sometimes silence is more useful than any words. Then she said, "Lauren, how long have you been watching this and telling yourself it's just how she is? I don't know how long that group has existed. I don't know how long she's been saying things like this behind my back. What I know is that she's been saying versions of it to my face my entire life. Behind my back, I never knew." Maya looked at the screenshot again. "Is there anyone else in the group?" "Aunt Patricia, at least 2 or 3 others. And nobody said anything to defend you. Nobody said anything." She was quiet again. Then, "Lauren, listen to me. You don't need to lose weight to be loved. You never did. But you deserve to be healthy. And you deserve to be surrounded by people who actually want good things for you. Those aren't the same thing." I swallowed the tears in that moment, but I kept the words. They stayed with me for a long time after. In the days that followed, I went, for the first time in 2 years, to make a doctor's appointment, not because of pressure, not because of guilt, for me, because I was 33 years old and I had symptoms I'd been ignoring for too long. Exhaustion that didn't lift with sleep, menstrual cycles that had never been regular, difficulty losing weight even when I tried with real consistency, a mental fog that showed up particularly in the afternoons, which I had learned to call laziness because that was the vocabulary I'd been given. I found Dr. Keisha Thompson through a recommendation from a colleague, an endocrinologist with a practice in Buckhead, taking new patients in 3 weeks. I made the appointment, and I went. The appointment lasted 1 hour and 20 minutes, which was more than double the length of any appointment I'd had before. Dr. Thompson asked me questions no one had ever asked me, about my cycles, my sleep, my mood, my family history. She ordered a panel of labs that filled 2 pages, and she said something I will carry forever. Your body has been trying to tell you something for a long time. Let's listen to what it's saying. I left the office that day different than I walked in. It wasn't transformation yet. It was simply the experience of being heard by a medical professional for the first time in my life, of having talked about exhaustion and heard back, let's investigate, of having mentioned the irregular cycles and heard, that matters, tell me more, of having said I try and it doesn't work, and hearing, instead of judgment, there may be a reason for that we haven't found yet. It was basic, it was the minimum, and I had never received the minimum from a doctor before. 2 weeks later, with the results in hand, she called me before the follow-up appointment. She said, "Lauren, I need to see you this week. I have significant findings to go over with you." I sat across from her desk with the lab results printed between us, and she explained, with the patience of someone who knows they're about to change a person's life, you have hypothyroidism. It's a condition where the thyroid gland doesn't produce enough thyroid hormone, which affects your metabolism, your energy levels, your mood, your body temperature, your menstrual cycle. This is not a lack of willpower. This is not a lack of discipline. This is a clinical condition, treatable, that you have probably had since your teenage years, and that nobody properly investigated because it was easier to blame the weight than to look for the cause. I sat looking at her for a moment. How long could I have lived differently if someone had looked for this sooner? She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, carefully, "There's no way to know that, but what I can tell you is that now you know, and from here we treat it. Since my teenage years," I repeated to myself, "since I was 17 and my mother took me to that first nutritionist. Since I was 21 and that diet didn't work and I felt like a complete failure. Since I was 26 and quit that gym membership convinced the problem was my commitment. The whole time, there had been something clinically wrong with my thyroid function, and nobody had looked for it because nobody had thought to look. It was simpler to tell me I was eating too much. It was simpler to tell me I wasn't trying hard enough. It was simpler to blame the fat woman than to open an endocrinology textbook and run the basic labs. The irony was so complete it was almost funny. Almost. The years of comments about willpower and discipline and eating less. The looks, the smaller portions, the magazine clippings, the internal voice I had inherited from my mother telling me I was responsible for my body being the way it was. And there was a medical condition, with a name and a diagnostic code and a treatment protocol, that nobody had looked for because it was more convenient to blame me. I left the office and drove directly to a Staples. I needed to write a letter. But before I tell you about the letter, I need to tell you about the Sunday, because the Sunday came before the letter was finished, and the Sunday was what made the letter necessary. I had decided, after the diagnosis, that I was going to have a conversation with my mother. A calm, adult conversation. No accusations, just showing her what had been discovered, asking her to stop the comments. I had rehearsed it. I had chosen my words. It was going to be at the next visit, at the right moment. The problem is my mother didn't give me the right moment. It was the 3rd Sunday of the month, dinner at her house in Decatur like always. I got there at 12:30. Derek was already there. The game was on. The house smelled like pot roast. It seemed like a normal Sunday. It lasted 40 minutes being normal. I was serving myself at the counter when my mother came up beside me and said, without lowering her voice, without caring that Derek was 10 feet away, "Lauren, are you really going to eat all of that? Weren't you trying to get yourself together?" I stopped, looked at my plate. It was a completely reasonable portion. "Mom, I'm fine, thank you." She made that sound mothers spend decades perfecting, half sigh, half verdict. She went and sat beside Derek, then, as if it were a natural continuation of the topic, said to him, "I sent that link to the new program to the family chat. Did you see it? The one for weight management. I told Lauren it might be something to look into." Derek looked at his phone, said nothing. I put my fork down on the plate. "Mom, can we not talk about my weight today?" She looked at me as if I'd said something completely unreasonable. "I'm saying it because I love you, Lauren. Do you think this is easy for me to watch?" Watch. The word landed exactly the way it always landed. Gentle enough not to sound like an insult, heavy enough to be one. I breathed. "You don't have to watch anything. I'm fine." "You are not fine. Look at yourself. Food has destroyed you." The room went quiet. Derek was still looking at his phone. My fork was still on the plate. She continued, "Look at what you've become. Either you go on a diet or you are no longer my daughter." I heard the words arrive as if from a distance, with a delay between the sound and the impact. And when the impact came, it was different from anything I expected. Because it wasn't pain, it was clarity. I looked at her, swallowed, and said with a calm that surprised me, "Then I'm not." I stood up, got my bag, walked to the entryway where my coat was on the hook. Inside my coat pocket was the envelope I'd brought. Not finished, not the moment I had planned, but it was enough. I put the envelope on the dining room table on top of the burgundy tablecloth. And I walked out. Derek didn't say a word. My mother didn't follow me. I closed the front door of that house carefully, as if I didn't want to wake anyone, and drove back to Virginia Highland with my heart beating in a way I couldn't name. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was something that would take me weeks to correctly identify. It was relief. I got home, let myself in, sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, and stayed there for a long time. Biscuit came and settled into my lap without being called, the way cats do when they understand you need something warm, and waited. I didn't cry. I wanted to cry, but the body sometimes doesn't cry when you expect it to. It waits for the moment when it finally feels safe enough. That night I rewrote the letter, the whole thing, better, more complete, with everything that needed to be there. And then, because I couldn't deliver it personally without losing its meaning, I called my father. I called him on his cell phone. He always picked up when I called, and said, "Dad, I need you tomorrow. It's not an emergency, but it matters." He showed up the next morning at 10 o'clock at my apartment in Virginia Highland, the first family member to ever know that address, because my mother had never asked to come, and I had never invited her. He came in, accepted the coffee I offered, sat at my kitchen table with the posture of a man preparing to hear something hard, and I put the envelope on the table between us. "Dad, this is for you. Read it here, in front of me, and then we'll talk." He opened it, read it. I watched his face change expression 2, 3, 4 times as he worked through the pages. The letter had 3 parts. The first was a record, chronological, specific, with dates and exact phrases, of everything I had experienced inside that family for years. Not an accusation, documentation. The second part was my lab results, with Dr. Thompson's diagnosis explained in plain language, and a sentence that read, "This has existed since my teenage years, and no one investigated it because it was easier to blame my body than to understand my body." The third part was a direct question to my father. "Did you know the house in Decatur is in your name only?" Because I needed to verify it when I started getting my financial affairs in order. And I found out that it is. Your name, Dad. Not hers, yours. And I need you to think, carefully and honestly, about what that means right now. My father was quiet for a long time after he finished reading. He folded the pages with care, replaced them in the envelope, looked out the window, then looked at me. "Lauren, Dad." He was quiet again. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "I know I failed you. I know I stayed quiet when I shouldn't have. There's no excuse for that. I don't have anything to say to that, Dad. I just needed you to know everything." He nodded. We talked for another hour. About the diagnosis, about what I was building, about the future. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He didn't try to defend my mother. He didn't try to rewrite the history. He just listened, and that was enough for now. When he left, I called Maya. She picked up on the second ring. I did it. "How did it go?" He listened. "That's the most I could ask for." "Lauren, are you okay?" "Yes." For the first time in a long time, yes. The phone started filling that afternoon. My mother, Derek, Aunt Patricia, a number I didn't recognize until I searched it and found it was connected to the real estate management company that handled their homeowners association, which seemed strange until it stopped being strange. I didn't answer any of them. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and went to make dinner. At 10:15 that night, I got a text from my father. Short. It said only, "I did what you asked. Called my attorney. She'll reach out to you in the morning." I read it 3 times, put my phone face down, and for the first time in a very long time I slept the whole night through. The next morning was a Wednesday in January, sun through the bedroom curtains, Biscuit already positioned on my chest performing her slow blink version of a wake-up call. I got up, made coffee, ate breakfast without rushing, and at 9:40 my phone rang with an Atlanta number I didn't know. It was the attorney. She was direct. "Your father explained the situation and asked me to contact you. He'd like to transfer the Decatur property to your name. I can start the paperwork this week if you'd like to move forward." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Yes, let's move forward." The title transfer took 16 business days. 16 days during which my mother tried to reach me 47 times. I counted. I didn't answer any of them. Derek sent 5 texts that started with Lauren, "You have to understand," and I didn't reply to any of them. Aunt Patricia left a voicemail I listened to once and deleted. On the 16th business day, the house indicator was formally transferred to my name in the DeKalb County property records. The house where my mother told me I was no longer her daughter. The house where I grew up hearing that my body was a problem to be solved. The house where I knew every room, every creak in the hardwood floors, every corner. It was mine. That same evening, my mother pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building in Virginia Highland. I saw her through my Ring doorbell camera before I buzzed her in. She looked different, smaller in a way that had nothing to do with height. Eyes red, hands together, no dish towel, no evaluating posture. When I opened the door, she looked at me for a long moment before speaking, and the first thing she said was not, "I'm sorry." It was, "Lauren, we need to talk about the house." I watched her, watched the desperation dressed up as urgency, watched the complete absence of any acknowledgement of what she had said on Sunday, watched her standing there not because she had understood what she'd done, but because the consequences had arrived. I looked at her for a long moment and I said, "It's too late for that. It's too." She opened her mouth. "Lauren, please. That is your father's and my home. We have lived there for 30 years. You cannot just—" "Mom, stop, breathe. Listen to me." She stopped. I could see her breathing. Quick, controlled, the effort of someone trying not to lose composure. "You came here to talk about the house. You didn't come to apologize for what you said Sunday. You didn't come to ask how I am. You didn't come to acknowledge that you told me I was no longer your daughter because of my body. You came to talk about the house. That tells me exactly what I needed to know. Lauren, of course you matter to me. You're my daughter. Yes, I am. And that's exactly why what you said on Sunday landed the way it did, because it came from you." Her eyes filled. I recognized that expression. I had seen it for years. Every time I tried to tell her that a comment had hurt me, it was the expression that preceded the reversal. Suddenly, I would become the person hurting her. "I have always wanted what's best for you. Everything I've ever said came from love." Mom, I know you believe that. And that is exactly the problem. Because love that consistently causes harm isn't concern, it's control. Love that bets your sister that I won't be able to manage on my own isn't care, it's contempt. "I saw the screenshots, Mom. I know about the group. I know about the bets." Her face changed. For a fraction of a second, a very small fraction, I saw something different appear in her expression. Not remorse, panic. That was taken out of context. It wasn't taken out of context. I read it. It was right there in plain language. She was quiet a moment, then quieter. "So what do you want from me now? What am I supposed to do?" "Nothing now. Now it's too late." "But when you want to have a real conversation, not about the house, not about what you want from me, when you want to ask me what I needed, what I felt, what it was like to be evaluated by you from the time I was 8 years old, I'll be here. Maybe." "Mom, the house isn't what matters right now. But when you need somewhere to sit and think about what happened, the address is right there, which is mine now." She opened her mouth, closed it. Her jaw was trembling slightly. I didn't move from the doorway. I closed the door with the same quiet I'd used when I closed the door of that house in Decatur 16 days before. I went to the kitchen, finished what I was making, ate standing at the counter looking out at the street. It wasn't happiness I felt. It was something quieter than that. It was justice. In the days that followed, there's a story I have to tell you, because without it, the picture is incomplete. Nicole called. My older sister from Chicago, who I had spent years assuming was either on my mother's side or simply indifferent. She called on a Thursday evening after she got home from work, and when I picked up, the first thing she said was, "I know you have no reason to trust me right now, but there's something I need to tell you." We were on the phone for 2 hours and 40 minutes. She told me she had moved to Chicago not because of Northwestern. She had moved because she couldn't live in that house anymore, in that environment where her body was a constant subject, that she had also gained weight in her early 20s, that she had also been taken to nutritionists, put on diets, compared unfavorably to thinner relatives, that she had lost the weight, yes, but at the cost of an eating disorder that she spent 2.5 years in treatment for before she could have a functional relationship with food, that she had never told anyone in our family, that she had stayed silent about my situation because of her own shame, because of the distance, because she didn't know how to help from 1,500 miles away, and that when she heard what had happened through our father, she had spent 3 days deciding whether to call. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, I said, "Nicole, you didn't have to carry that alone." She cried. I cried too. The crying that hadn't come on Sunday finally arrived on a Thursday night, talking to the sister I thought I didn't have. "We're not going to fix everything in one call," she said. "But I want to be present. If you'll let me, I'll let you," I said. With time, she understood. Derek texted me 3 weeks later. It wasn't an apology. It was more of an attempt to make me feel like I was overreacting, that my mother was struggling, that the situation with the house had blindsided her and it wasn't fair. I read it once, put my phone on the table, got a glass of water. Then I came back and typed, "Derek, when you decide you want to have a real conversation, I'm here. But I'm not going to manage the feelings of the person who hurt me while my own feelings were dismissed for years." He didn't reply. I didn't expect him to. My mother sent me a letter, an actual handwritten letter, 4 pages, that arrived in the mail on a Tuesday in February. I read it once, filed it. I wasn't ready to respond. Maybe one day I will be. Maybe I won't. What I know is that whatever relationship I have with her now, if there is one, can't be rebuilt on the same foundation. The foundation cracked. If there's ever something new, it will have to be built from the ground up, with different terms, with words that don't include commentary on my body, with love that doesn't come packaged in conditions. In the months that followed, I started treatment with Dr. Thompson. It wasn't a quick or linear process. Hypothyroidism doesn't get cured. It gets managed. Medication, adjustments, consistent monitoring, food that made sense for my specific body, movement I chose because I wanted it, not because I was punishing myself. I found a registered nurse named Angela, who had a completely different approach than anyone I had consulted before. She started every session by asking how I was doing emotionally, because she understood that the body and the mind are not separate departments. My first session with Angela lasted 90 minutes. She didn't weigh me in the first 30. She asked about my relationship with food, not what I ate, but how I felt before, during, and after eating. She asked about the memories I had around food from childhood. She asked about guilt, about pleasure, about whether I could eat something without immediately calculating what it was going to cost me later. I cried in that session, not because the questions were hard, the opposite. It was the first time anyone had treated my relationship with food as something that had history, context, emotion behind it, instead of a math problem to be solved with calorie equations. Angela said something that stayed with me. Eating is not a character test. It never was. It's nourishment and pleasure and culture and connection. When we strip all of that away and replace it with guilt and discipline, we're not taking care of the body. We're punishing it. I started swimming, not because anyone told me to, not because it was the right exercise, but because I discovered that when I got in the pool at the Eastlake YMCA at 6:30 in the morning, something unlocked inside me. A stillness, a clarity that the rest of the day didn't offer. I started with 20 minutes, then 40, then an hour. The first few weeks were hard, my body complaining, my lungs impatient, my mind looking for reasons to quit at every wall. But I didn't quit, not because I needed to lose weight. Because I needed a space where the only measure was, did you show up? On a Saturday morning in April, 8 months after that Sunday in Decatur, I swam my first open water mile in Lake Lanier with a group from the YMCA. I climbed out of the water with my arms shaking and Maya waiting on the bank with a sign she had made on cardboard that said, "Lauren, I knew it," in letters she had clearly rushed. I hugged her, wet and exhausted, and laughing at the same time. "You didn't tell me you were going to do this," she said. "I didn't know if I could." Didn't want to say anything before. She looked at me. "Lauren, you have done everything you decided to do. You always have. The problem was never you." "I know," I said. "I know that now. I lost weight. That's also true. Not because it was the goal. It was a byproduct of the treatment, the movement, the regulated sleep, the relationship with food that finally stopped being a battlefield. The body changed. But what changed first, and changed more, was something else. It was my posture. It was my voice. It was the ability to take up space without apologizing for it. One day, at a routine follow-up with Dr. Thompson, she asked me how I was doing, and I paused before answering. Not because the question was difficult, but because the answer was simple in a way I wasn't used to. "Good," I said, and it was true. Today I live in the same apartment in Virginia Highland. I drink my coffee looking out the window, biscuit on the windowsill beside me, before I head to the pool. The house in Decatur is still in my name. My mother still lives there because I'm not the kind of person who puts her mother on the street. But the terms are different now. They exist. They were established through an attorney. They are clear and adult. I don't follow what happens with the people who hurt me. Not actively. Derek exists. Aunt Patricia exists. The bets they made about me existed, and the screenshots still live in a folder on my phone. The difference is that their existence has become irrelevant to the construction of my life. The woman who hid her body in loose clothes and deleted her own photos doesn't exist anymore. In her place is someone I'm proud of, not for the number on the scale, but for the courage it took to survive what she survived and on the other side, to build something instead of burning everything down. The best answer to the people who tried to make me small was not revenge. It was living so well that their existence became too small to fit inside my life. Before you go, there are some things I need to say. Things I wish someone had told me much earlier. Because maybe you're living what I lived. Maybe you recognize something in this story. And if you do, you need to hear this. Medical weight bias is real, and it is documented. It happens when a healthcare provider attributes symptoms to weight without investigating underlying causes. You have the right to request comprehensive testing. You have the right to change doctors, dietitians, any provider who makes you feel like your body is a moral failure rather than a clinical question. If you leave an appointment feeling ashamed instead of informed, that is a meaningful signal. If you feel dismissed, you can file a complaint with your state medical board or reach out to your insurance provider for support in finding someone new. What happened to me? Spending years with an undiagnosed thyroid condition because it was easier to blame the weight is not rare. It is more common than it should be. You deserve a provider who listens to you. Family body commentary is especially difficult to recognize because it comes wrapped in love. When your mother, your father, your sibling comments on your body, they usually believe they're helping. That belief does not make the harm smaller. You can tell the difference between genuine health concern and control, disguised as care, by asking yourself, would this person comment on my body if I were thinner? If the answer is no, it's not about health, it's about appearance, and you have the right to set a boundary. It is possible to love your family and not allow them to comment on your body. Those two things coexist. The boundary is not rejection, it is self-protection. Internalized weight bias is what happens when the voices from outside become the voice inside. When you wake up and the first thought is a criticism of your own body, ask yourself where that voice came from. Is it yours? Or does it belong to someone who was so present for so long that it became part of your internal monologue? Recognizing that difference is the beginning of something important. If you are struggling with your relationship to your body or to food, there is help available. Therapists who specialize in body image and disordered eating can help you separate what belongs to you from what was placed on you. You do not have to figure this out alone. You do not have to wait until you hit bottom to ask for help. The National Eating Disorders Association helpline has been permanently closed. If you need support, please reach out to the Alliance for Eating Disorders Awareness Helpline, which you can find at allianceforeatingdisorders.com. If this story touched something in you, share it with someone you think needs to hear that she is not alone. Because isolation is one of the most powerful tools of weight stigma. It makes you believe the problem is only yours, that it is weakness, that it is something you should be able to solve without help. It isn't. It never was. Tell me in the comments, what was the moment you decided you were going to stop accepting less than you deserve? I want to read everyone. You showing up here matters more than you know. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. I'll see you in the next video.